I'm kind of losing my mind on this one, Alex. You know, I fully expected we were going to hear something about drugs in the toxicology report. That was not a surprise to me. But at the same time, I didn't expect to hear from the victim's stepmom last night and hear that there were pill bottles inside a backpack that the police did not even bother to take. What are you hearing on the scene at this point?
Look, I can tell you that this was unexpected, not just for us, but also for the family members. Think about this. I've been knocking on doors, including the medical examiner's office, asking them, look, are you guys going to expedite this toxicology report? And basically they told me point blank, no, this case is no different than anyone else that comes across our desk, but something must have happened, something must have changed. Maybe it was that meeting with the Platte County prosecutor, because now all of a sudden we are seeing an expedition of this case. All of a sudden, preliminary toxicology reports are coming in to the families, and they now know at least a portion of the story, which is inside of the bloodstream of those three men was fentanyl, cocaine, and THC. We don't know the actual specifics, the levels that might have been in that bloodstream. Certainly it was enough to go beyond, well beyond the lethal dosage. But again, the actual toxicology reports are not in the hands of the families at this point. It's in the hands of the detectives, and they have not turned that over yet. But at least the Kansas City Police Department decided that we need to give these folks some answers at least, so that way they can get some closure. Right now, preliminary results, obviously we're asking for that toxicology report so we can get those details and we can report the official cause of death. But that still could take several more weeks.
Yeah, you would think that the families, I mean, it's one thing to get a phone call from the detective, right, to tell you here's what we can, you know, finally reveal. It's another thing to get your hand on the autopsies, and you and your lawyer can go over them and decide what the next step is, like maybe wrongful death lawsuits, you know, like that's something entirely possible. I'm curious, Alex, I'm not going to suggest for a minute that you have been able to dig into the digital files of all of these people, the party guests, Jordan Willis, etc. That's likely something that is tightly held by the police. But is that a mine that should be looked at this point? The fact that maybe there was a whole bunch of chit-chat between all the guys before they came over for the visit to Jordan Willis's house pertaining to what they might be bringing with them for fun, party favors.
I think that's a great question. I think that if this does move to criminal prosecution, certainly phone lines and text messages, Facebook messages, social media chats, that's all going to be closely examined. Obviously, we heard yesterday from the cousin of Clayton, Caleb, who said that this was just a normal activity that happens when surrounded by Jordan, that he is known to manufacture and distribute drugs to his friends for recreational purposes, was that line of thought. But certainly I think the families, when speaking to them, they're not against criminal prosecution, but only if it actually is deemed to be criminal behavior in terms of maybe passing out these drugs, which ultimately led to their deaths. They're not saying, they're not pushing for that. Yesterday it was mostly about just, look, we want answers. We're hoping to get those answers, and if it leads to criminal prosecution, great. But I think, honestly, that meeting with the Platte County prosecutor is probably what expedited this toxicology report, because now, all of a sudden, the Kansas City Police Department, the medical examiners are seeing real action being taken by these victims' families, and they're hustling it along.
Yeah, I mean, I smell a wrongful death suit, probably three wrongful death suits at this point from the three different families. Listen, I can't imagine what they're going through, because it's bad enough to lose your loved one suddenly, and then it is brutal to lose your loved one and not have answers. And I can't even for a moment fathom what it's like to do that in the national spotlight, and then to get this call and this to be in the national spotlight. Are any family members sort of, you know, talking about the effects of this on them? I mean, I just would imagine that they're grieving privately, but has anyone said anything?
You know, what's interesting is I think this brings a sense of relief. Yesterday, when speaking to them, they said, we just want to know that people are looking into this, that this is an actual investigation, and that if we don't have the answers, but at least someone's looking for the answers. And so when answers did come today to their doorstep, to their phones, I think that was a relief. Oh my gosh, now we sort of are getting closer to the answers that we've all looked for. That being said, I don't think, at least the family members that I spoke to, it was much of a surprise. I think just about everyone had the idea that drugs were the main contributor here. If it's not the only contributor, it's at least one of them. And so I don't think that there is necessarily a sense of surprise, but I do think that there is a sense of relief knowing that it's coming to a close.
Alice Capriello, as usual, great job out there. Thank you for this. Really appreciate it. Someone dies while someone is in the commission of a felony, you can be charged with murder, and in many states it is death penalty. So I'm just sort of flummoxed by the idea that this house was not a crime scene. Does any of it make sense to you?
Well, good evening, Ashley. It's been a while. It's good to be back with you. I will tell you from the beginning of this thing, I mean, this happened, about 3 weeks ago? And I'm a little surprised at this call for these answers to be immediate. In the fast food world we live in here, it's like they want the 43 minutes of a television show with no commercials, and it just doesn't work that way. It's a tragic, tragic scene. I don't know that it wasn't secured by those officers that responded. There is a video out that purportedly shows that they had Willis in custody at the time that they arrived. I've also read where another person that was going to the scene approached it. There were police everywhere, and there was some caution tape, to use their term, around the house. So that would indicate to me that there was some sort of crime scene tape causing a barrier, which would indicate that they have secured the scene. Now, as far as what was recovered there and so forth and so on, we won't know that until we understand what law enforcement presents to us as what they recovered. In terms of a felony.
But wait, because we absolutely know at this point that, as Ricky Johnson was dead and frozen out in the backyard that we're looking at right now, his backpack was sitting in that home. And when Jordan Willis, the owner, moved out because he was under so much scrutiny, he went off into hiding, and now he's in rehab. The backpack was still there. It was another connection, another family friend that brought Ricky's backpack out of that home and over to his family to reunite his belongings with his family. And I just can't for the life of me figure out, if you have 3 dead men mysteriously in the backyard, and you've cuffed the homeowner and then uncuffed him and taken him downtown to question him, how would you not process that scene a little more carefully? How would you not take a backpack of one of the victims and notice 2 bottles that have pills in them, one antacid and ibuprofen? Maybe, I don't know, and no one will never know because no one bothered to look.
Well, and I don't either. I mean, I wasn't there, so I don't know if there were pictures taken and they felt like that was good enough. I don't know, but
wouldn't be good for a felony murder case, would it, Phil? Honestly, like, it would not hold muster in a felony murder case, right? Because somebody would say, I want to test those pills. You can't. Sorry, we left them in the house.
We are so far away from a felony murder case with this thing that
are we?
That's not. Oh yeah. This is, look, I tell you what needs to happen here, in my view. And I'm looking at this through the eyes of a homicide cop. I'm not looking at it, with any particular. I've got no dog in the fight in that sense. Yeah. What I'm looking at here is we have a scene. We have 3 dead bodies in the backyard, and the circumstances under which they're there is what's in question. Now, we've got this tox test that we've not been given the official results, but if we're talking about a mixture of cocaine, fentanyl, THC, they were smoking dope, and I don't know if there's ethanol, alcohol involved in this thing or not, but a lot of these drugs, a lot of these narcotics that are taken cause the body to heat up in an abnormal way. And what do people do when that happens? So they move outside.
They go outside. Yeah. You're right. And I was asking if the bodies had their clothes removed, because that was another big question. I have to wrap it there, Phil, but I think you're onto something with that. I think you're on. Real quick.
Well, I've seen this mostly with MDMA, with methylene dioxymethamphetamine, ecstasy, where the body heats up and people will take their clothes off, run out in the dead of winter to get cooled down. So I don't know if that's what happened here. So my question is, these are grown men celebrating the Kansas City Chiefs game. They won it. They're really celebrating. And they're doing it in this. They ingested this stuff voluntarily. They got outside. So my question here is, were they dead as a result of what they took? Or did they pass out because
Right.
of the intoxication, and they froze to
Because of
death.
the, yep. And
that's what the
that we
autopsy
don't know.
report-
And you're right. Autopsy is going to bring that, and we are waiting for that. That's why no one says they froze to death. We don't know that. No one says
Right, we
they
don't know.
OD'd. We don't know that. Could be a
That's
combo.
correct.
I got to leave it there. Phil Waters, thank you. Appreciate it. As always, you've
those toxicology reports. And they show fentanyl, cocaine, and marijuana in the systems of all three men who died. News Nation is told, and this really comes from the families who met with the police, that the amount of fentanyl is well beyond the lethal limit, not legal limit, lethal limit. Today, the toxicology reports shared with those families, 38-year-old Ricky Johnson, 36-year-old Clayton McGinney, 37-year-old David Harrington. After mounting pressure from family and the media, families have been really angry over the lack of answers up to this point. Meanwhile, the living friend, Jordan Willis, was a tenant in the home they'd gone to, has moved out of the house, checked himself into rehab, never contacted the police despite the men being dead and frozen in his backyard for 2 days. His family calling the deaths of his friends as a serious wake-up call. They're saying that this is what led him to go into rehab. After the shocking loss of three of his close friends under extremely tragic circumstances, Jordan recognized he had a problem with addiction. He immediately checked himself into rehab after vacating his home and putting his things into storage. Since the beginning of this case, police have said there were no signs of foul play. They were not investigating this as a homicide. And tonight they're just saying the case remains an ongoing death investigation. Joining me now, Jesse Weber, attorney and anchor for the Law and Crime Network, also a News Nation legal contributor. And my friend Mark Eiglarsh, criminal defense attorney and former Miami-Dade County prosecutor. All right, so Jesse, now we've got this information about the fentanyl, a lethal limit. Where do you think that takes the investigation?
So what we don't have is the autopsy report. What I mean by that is we still don't know the exact cause of death or manner of death. It looks like it could be the fentanyl. What we don't know is how they got the fentanyl. We don't know if they knew they ingested fentanyl. So many of the cases we cover are people who are given what they think is some other drug, and it's laced with fentanyl. The person who supplied it actually ends up facing criminal charges. Because we don't have those answers yet, it then becomes a question of who introduced that into the mix. And remember, they all died together outside, which is a very eerie circumstance, and we know that Mr. Willis was allegedly passed out. So did they all take it together? That becomes the next question. We definitely have a piece of the puzzle, but now it becomes, what do we do with it?
But, and Jesse raises an important point, Mark, which is whether it was intentional or not. It could be totally unintentional, and yet the person who supplied the fentanyl, whether it's the guy in the house, whether it's somebody else, could be in legal trouble.
I know that all too well. My first thought was, with certainty, they're going after whoever might have supplied the drug. I am representing someone currently who was an addict and was using drugs with someone else, and he supplied it to her. She overdoses, and now I'm defending him for felony first-degree murder. So that's the popular charge these days. Let's find out where the drugs came from. Let's go after them and subject that person to a life sentence.
For Jeffrey Swisher, chairman of the Department of Anesthesiology at California Pacific Medical Center. Dr. Swisher, thanks so much for joining us. So we're still awaiting what the results of these toxicology reports are. We heard possibly cocaine. There's a lot of people who've been focusing on the possibility of fentanyl because these three appear to have just walked outside. One was found sitting in a lawn chair. How quickly would a fentanyl overdose happen in a person?
Well, fentanyl is one of those medications which gets a lot of news because, unfortunately, there's a lot of misinformation about fentanyl and how it's used and how it's ingested. Unfortunately, a lot of substances that are bought on the street are contaminated with fentanyl, either purposefully or not purposefully, and people don't know that they're taking it. Fentanyl is a narcotic. It's a short-acting, very potent narcotic. It's much more potent than morphine or heroin is. Fentanyl, depending on the route by which it's ingested, can work immediately, or if it's ingested orally, it can take a longer time to take effect.
Right.
So we're speculating as to whether fentanyl is in there or not, but you don't have to have fentanyl. It could have been like you hear polysubstance abuse, and if you look at Heath Ledger, or you look at Matthew Perry or Whitney Houston or Tom Petty, or Prince, all these people were engaging in polysubstance abuse. And
polysubstance meaning they were taking a lot of things. There wasn't just one thing found in their system.
Exactly. Ativan, Ambien, cocaine, ketamine, in the case of Matt Perry, exactly. Just keep in mind that even though they said that the cause of death of Matthew Perry was ketamine, Matthew Perry fell asleep in a hot tub because of ketamine and he drowned.
Right.
Not that the ketamine is what killed him, but it was the proximate cause of his death.
So that leads me to this question. The fourth man who was renting the house, named Jordan Willis, says he spent 2 days sleeping on the couch. He has now reportedly checked himself into rehab, saying that this whole experience has been a, quote, wake-up call. Could he also have been suffering from the same effects of whatever drug or drugs the three victims who died took? They just happened to be outside when they succumbed, and he was fortunate enough to be inside and not in freezing cold?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, unfortunately, these medications are essentially anesthetics. It's what I do for a living. I mean, you give people enough anesthetics and they'll fall asleep. And these drugs are additive in their effect. And so, again, similar to Matthew Perry, he didn't die necessarily because of the ketamine. He died because he drowned in a hot tub. These men died because they fell asleep in sub-zero temperatures and they developed hypothermia and froze to death. So that's the cause of death is hypothermia, but as a result of intoxication with multi-substances, which caused them to stop breathing, fall asleep, essentially.
The whole group had been partying and watching the football game together leading up to this. Neighbors say they saw the men going into the house with 2 30-packs of beer. Could alcohol also have played a role in all this?
Absolutely. I mean, alcohol alone could have played a role in this. If you drink enough, you will fall asleep, and so it's just intoxication to the extent where you pass out, and you do that in, again, sub-zero temperatures. I'm sure that's happened, many times in history. Fishermen or people out in the cold fall asleep from drinking too much and then develop hypothermia. It doesn't take long to die from hypothermia.
Yeah.
That's unfortunately the case.
Bottom line, in many of these cases, a drug or alcohol and drugs or alcohol alone may have caused them to fall asleep or pass out, but it's the cold that killed them.
Yeah, the cold that killed them. And, exposure and hypothermia, again, as you develop hypothermia, your respiratory rate decreases, your metabolic rate decreases, and eventually you will have a cardiac arrest from, hypoxia and not breathing.
I assume this is why we haven't gotten the autopsy report yet, then, that toxicology is in, but the autopsy is not?
Right. Toxicology, they say it takes 6 to 8 weeks, but, if you have a good sample of blood, or sometimes they take fluid from the vitreous of the eye, depending, wherever it comes from, this can be done almost immediately. It's a gas chromatography, or there's other laboratory tests. Autopsies are a physical examination of the body, and it takes a pathologist a period of time to do it, and they want to be complete.